All right. Well, this is my book review for The Secret Life of a Satanist. I'll be completely honest, I initially read this book because I had a dream about it one night during the summer of 2025. I was actually still in between reading the other book, We Are Satanists, uh, when randomly I had a dream during the summer. Basically, I don't want to get all up into it, but for some reason in the dream it had said, like, somebody had told me, read The Secret Life of a Satanist to understand more about, like, Carla and Xena. So eventually, after I finished We Are Satanists, I decided to pick up this book. I walked into the book basically blind, wanting to learn as I read, not trying to ruin it for myself. But long story short, I already knew what most of the book was about, as it was the original blueprint for what became We Are Satanists. The books basically have very much of the same thing. So, I'll be honest, I don't even feel like reviewing We Are Satanists because they really are the same book, flat out. The only difference is that We Are Satanists focuses less on what Anton LaVey said and his philosophy, and just a little bit more on the history about the Church of Satan. But that's still only slight. I'll be completely honest in that I was rather disappointed with this book, as I had hoped for a more historical look at Anton LaVey, but it devolved into more of an interview with him and would showcase his diatribes. In some ways, the book was just another soapbox for him, which is odd when you consider that it was supposed to be a biography, not an autobiography. While exploring the thoughts and viewpoints of the subject for a biography could help enrich a book, the subject being, of course, the person the book is about, Anton's antics and diatribes only seem to detract from the reading experience overall. I'm unsure who the ideal demographic is for this book, at least for when it was originally written. In many ways, it is preaching to the choir, surely a book created for those already in the know about Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan. Many of the things LaVey would say either would be just completely off the wall, semi-entertaining, or just completely ridiculous. Many of the things said in this book could be taken as dog whistles. Even though LaVey himself called racists stupid, the way this book is written, it can easily be misinterpreted to bolster such thought points even still. It is so odd to me that LaVey really believed that there was something special about the people who consider themselves Satanists. That he also wanted them to breed and create a master race. How can you say things like that, mention eugenics, approving a police state, mention Hitler as much as they do through the book, and mention a final solution, without it being some sort of dog whistle? But I guess I shouldn't be surprised, as many religions actually have an elitist complex that believe their group of people are the special chosen ones. There's even texts within Mormonism and Christianity that try to justify racism. It's very Christian of LaVey to believe that the followers of Satanism are truly special. For example, in the Bible, they mention the 144,000 in Revelations. Many people of a Christian background that are aware of this tend to believe that they are part of the 144 and are thus special, gifted, and among God's elite. LaVey's idea of Satanists having some sort of special chromosome or gene and should reproduce because of it is utterly ridiculous. Why should people reproduce because of a spiritual belief? Do you even hear yourself? Just because someone can reproduce doesn't mean that they should, satanic or not. LaVey said himself that Satanists are born, not made. So, by suggesting that Satanists should reproduce with other Satanists, that's assuming every baby born would be a Satanist. And that's clearly not true. It reminds me a lot of the Christian idea that everybody is a born Christian. It all just comes off as religious craziness to me. It's certain points like that which showed the off-the-wall ideas that Anton LaVey would have. Others include his fixation on trapezoids, how to become a werewolf, his misogyny, complaining about women always being cold, and his rather creepy fixation on basically glorified sex dolls. On the flip side, Anton would say things in the book that would be legitimately funny. I laughed when they mentioned the McDonald's ice cream machine being broke, even back in 1990. I laughed at that because I really thought, some things just never change, do they? The idea of a man wearing a t-shirt and underwear not having the same effect as a woman doing it was also funny, and actually reminded me of something I remember being the idea of a comic by The Oatmeal back in the earlier mid-2000s. In general, Anton would make rather humorous and somewhat true observations about people that I could agree with in some ways. I found it interesting how Anton would unintentionally predict/call things that did end up happening in the near future when the book was originally released. For example, he did call that public shootings would only get worse, and they did. LaVey passed away in 1997, and only 2 years later, in 1999, the Columbine shooting happened. Granted, on the same hand, I guess, however you want to call it, I did find it to be ridiculous that he thought that this one shooting that's mentioned in the book had something to do with him and his ex-wife or common-law wife, Diane. This is something I'll just touch on very briefly where, for whatever reason, there were a lot of things that LaVey would think were relevant to him when in reality it's you can't prove that. And they really probably weren't relevant to him at all. There were some points that, of course, I didn't completely agree with, though I did see his point on. For example, he talked about how heavy metal wasn't satanic. Today, in 2025, many people would beg to differ. But thinking about the state of metal back in 1990, a lot of these satanic/diabolist/Luciferian type of bands, whatever you want to call them, really weren't around. Even still, not every metal band is satanic. Just because a band is metal doesn't automatically make them evil or satanic. Would I consider the band Mastodon satanic? Hell fucking no. Though, I know that this isn't what LaVey was really getting at. The way he described it in this book, he was just anti-metal. Many sources today state that LaVey hated metal, though, which is fair. Many metalheads hate metal too. But I thought that his idea of the music he listened to growing up being the true satanic music as interesting, though it didn't seem of course, the key to true esoteric knowledge. The way LaVey described it, it just came off as a pretentious grandpa claiming that the old days were better and new music sucks now. The idea of using music to achieve a goal during a magical ritual did make sense, though the book describes it as if a person should only use the music from the 30s and 40s because it'd have a better charge. While I understood what the point LaVey was making was, from an outside perspective, I already knew that him saying that totally lost a lot of the readers in this book. That is one of the faults of this book in general. It seems to assume that the reader is already immersed in magic, rituals, and even practices regularly. I often wondered if this was the intent, to only appeal to such a niche audience, or if LaVey believed that there are more people who practice and know about magic than there really are. It's because of this assumption that the reader already knows a thing or two about magic that it comes off as a lot more pretentious than intended. It's ironic that LaVey claimed he wasn't pretentious, then essentially challenged any potential detractors with a keyboard battle in the book. Even more ironic, considering the fact that pretentiousness is considered a sin according to the Church of Satan. I've read a lot about magical and esoteric topics thanks to some of the music I listen to. Many of the musicians I enjoy have made nods towards Gotia, esoteric symbols, and things of the like within their songs, album art, and merchandise. Even knowing what I do, LaVey would just lose me when he'd go off about certain topics. One of these being the trapezoid. I don't understand the fixation that Anton LaVey had about trapezoids. Even with the parts I know about esoteric subjects, the talk about trapezoids just comes off as a neurodivergent fixation, instead of a true magical piece of knowledge. While I find the concept of suspending your disbelief to be important when talking about esoteric topics, LaVey is the only one to have talked about trapezoids, let alone that much. It makes little sense to me. Why would a trapezoid make for a stronger connection than a pentagon or parallelogram, or of course the whole pentagram? This is not explained in the book and remains a mystery to me. It's parts like this that I question why this was included in the book. This was one of the parts of the book that made me seriously question, who was this book for? Anton LaVey, I guess. I don't ask that actually in a brusque way, but out of genuine curiosity. While I've read about the Church of Satan before reading this book, there was still so much more that I wanted to know. When reading The Secret Life of a Satanist, I still felt out of the loop when it came to the history on the church. I often wondered if the intended audience was for people that had been a part of the church for a long while. If so, that leaves out a major audience who could have found the book more interesting if more historical information was relayed. Then again, we have to remember The Secret Life of a Satanist is the approved biography of Anton LaVey. That doesn't automatically mean it's the most accurate, historical, or even logical. While the book starts off as a more historical type, eventually it devolves into a diatribe from LaVey. This disrupts the flow of how the book reads. Despite being less than 300 pages, depending on what version you get, the book itself chugs and chugs, making small bits of information longer than you'd expect or want them to be. As a reader, this was not a fun book to read. It felt like Anton interjected too much, turning this biography into an autobiography. While it's not bad to create an autobiography, we shouldn't just act like this was a completely separate project that Blanche Barton completed by herself. At what point would we be able to call this an autobiography? Anton was so involved with this that I truly consider this to be one. And that's not a bad thing. I think it would come off as more genuine if they conveyed the book this way. The more I looked at reviews from other people online, many said the same thing. I think it's a justified opinion to have that Anton was much more involved with the book than it seems. What's strange to me is how people have referred to Blanche Barton as just Anton's secretary. It's strange how this has been used as a way to make her seem insignificant when he was among his baby mamas. Blanche, who I'll call Professor Barton, was also one of the people who would speak on behalf of the church, especially against the Satanic Panic. Barton is actually incredibly intelligent and has made great points about the ridiculous witch hunt that was the Satanic Panic back in the 80s. And for somebody that was born pretty much right after the Satanic Panic was over, her writings have helped me understand just how ridiculous it really was in its heyday. Even in her position as Anton's secretary, that doesn't diminish her intelligence, wit, and writing skills as a person. When Anton wasn't interjecting, and especially at the end of the book in the revised, I believe, 2014 edition, Professor Barton's writing turned out to be, really, really nice. She actually is a very good writer. What I also find interesting, though, too, is how Professor Barton mentions Stanton LaVey more than his own mother, Zena, ever did. Stanton passed away in 2022, but before he did, she apparently disowned him and left him with Diane, Zena's mother, to raise him. Stanton is talked about in the book Charles Manson Now, where it states that he did not know who his father was, nor was there one listed on his birth certificate. Despite there being rumors that Anton was the father, Charles Manson Now states that the father may have been a stoner, local delinquent who dropped out of his mother's school. Or potential stoner. Stanton is also quoted as having said, "She dumped me off on my grandmother Diane and swore she'd never speak to either of us again. Which, considering I had never done anything wrong to her, is strange." Later in 2022, Zena did an interview with Jordan Peterson, and she did not even mention Stanton by name. Stanton Zaharoff LaVey. Before Stanton passed away, he was on social media, and when he would talk about or post about Diane, he would refer to her as Mom. So I think that says a lot. I looked through the sources that were cited at the end of the book, The Secret Life of a Satanist, and while I could not find every single book listed, there were plenty of news articles that actually did corroborate the things written in this book. For example, it is true that Jane Mansfield would call Anton for a happy spell. Anton and Jane did take photos together. Now, we can't prove that he and Jane had a romantic relationship, but I did find it odd that some of the events, like Anton allegedly going to dinner with Mansfield before one of Brody's crashes, was plausible. There are a lot of things that Anton said which couldn't be completely proven, but were plausible. Perhaps that's what Anton wanted. To create a web of plausible stories that made him seem a lot more grand than he really was. Looking through the newspaper archives, the earliest clip I could find of Anton was a 1955 San Francisco Chronicle, where the Anton LaVeys went to a birthday party. This would have been around the time he was still married to Carol, which I didn't write it down here, but I do want to just say before I forget that it is actually true that Carol, Anton's first wife, the one he actually only legally married, really did die in 1975. And I found a couple of snippets of that, but there was never anything that described how or why she died. And I found that very peculiar. Anyway, in 1957, the SF Chronicle posted an ad for Anton, who was going to be playing at the Wilshire and a couple of other places. On September 30th, 1957, the SF Chronicle posted a snippet about Anton, who was selling his paintings at an art festival, and he was referred to as an artist. It's here that you start to see Anton as more of a showman. A snip from December 16th, 1959, shows a quote from LaVey, who seemed to have had this satanic thinking already underway. Even through all of the articles and clips that I found, there were still things that I couldn't find. I could not find any records in the news about the house Anton allegedly bought that was, being sold to him. I couldn't find anything about Marilyn Monroe being a burlesque dancer at the Mayan Theater, though there was a clip I found of her being a burlesque dancer in a movie she was in 1948. the reason why I bring up the house part is that allegedly Anton bought the house that became the Black House, though later on it was stated that no, that was his parents' house and it was given to him. Anyway, to me it's clear though that this book is not about Howard Stanton LaVey. It's about Anton Xander LaVey, the showman. These were two different people in my eyes. In some ways, I understand why Xena and Nicholas Schreck came out with a fact sheet disproving many of the things that Anton said or claimed to have done. Especially back in the 90s, when there wasn't any other way to really investigate his claims so easily, I could see how there'd be a lot of people that would believe everything he said. To me, I think it's easy to see when some of his claims were pure bullshit. But I guess if you knew or talked to him in person, it would be easy to be pulled into Anton's allure or potential draw that he had. Though it is interesting to note that in news articles dating back to the 60s, Anton was still claiming, he didn't claim the stuff about the girls yet, but he did claim to have been, a carnival or a circus worker. So I'm not sure if that was just part of the persona that he created very early on, or if somehow it really was true that he worked in the circus, yet somehow was never, recorded on paper. This fact sheet is mentioned in the updated version of The Secret Life of a Satanist in the last 2 chapters. After Anton died in 1997, it was released a few months later in February of 1998. In a 2025 interview, Nicholas Schreck claimed that Xena was being hounded by press to confirm details about her father's life, so they could create obituaries on him. Allegedly, the fact sheet was just for the press and somehow got leaked and posted by someone online. This is referenced on Wikipedia and even archived on the Internet Archive, which is titled Anton LaVey, Legend and Reality. Certain parts were only minor details clarified, such as the true names of Anton's parents, who, in the past, he had told people in the press his parents' middle names instead of their first names. And then, of course, it was clarified that Anton's birth name was Howard Stanton LaVey. Various other parts discuss Anton having never been a part of the circus, never visiting Germany at age 15, never having been enrolled at San Francisco City College, never having been a part of Rosemary's Baby, and even more. And while it may be true that not all of that happened, I couldn't help but wonder, so what did he do? Seriously. I looked up Anton, or Howard actually, through the 1950 census, and it stated that his employment was OT, which I looked it up and that's supposed to mean other, or potentially mean other. So if Anton's employment was other in the 1950 census, and he wasn't in college or at the circus, what the fuck was he doing? Sorry to be so blunt, but what was he doing? That is an honest to God question. Honest to Satan? Anyway. The fact sheet also claims that Anton was abusive towards people and animals. The Secret Life of a Satanist mentions Anton's Nubian lion Tagar, who Anton would bring to local areas for kids to see. Anton had to give up Tagar after neighbors complained about Tagar's roars, though in a few news clips I found, the story turns out to be a bit more that Anton had agreed to babysit, or cat sit, however you want to call it, a French jaguar, the animal, and the two big cats did not get along. This caused a cat fight and a water pipe getting busted, and Tagar ended up having to be sent to the zoo. Of course, the question comes to mind, what was with these people and their affinity for big cats? In a post-2020 world, it just reminded me of the whole Tiger King thing. It appears that Anton definitely knew multiple people who owned big cats like he did. Looking at old news articles from the 60s about Anton, it seemed just like more of a show of opulence than a true love for wild animals. Of course, to me, I don't personally agree with owning big cats in a suburban setting. The food cost alone would be outrageous, and actually, that was mentioned in some articles I clipped. But no backyard is big enough for a wild animal like that. In that sense alone, I do think that it's cruel to own an animal like that who is created to roam free. Nicholas and Zena's fact sheet states that Anton would use a cattle prod to frighten Tagar and put him into submission. It also states that Anton had only made two visits to Tagar when he was sent to the San Francisco Zoo. This seems to be corroborated in a news article by the San Francisco Examiner dated March 3rd, 1970. Titled The Anything Goes Church, the end of the article states that LaVey rarely visited Tagar. He's quoted as saying, "I would like to see him more often, but Tagar gets too emotional. He yells and cries because he thinks I've come to take him home." Which definitely is pretty sad to read. I looked up Tagar on the newspaper archives, and he was not mentioned anymore after this, the only exception being actually from a drawing by Zena, which was dated September 21st, 1970, from the San Francisco Chronicle. Zena, aged 6 years old, had won the junior art champion for her drawing of Tagar and his cubs. While in captivity at the SF Zoo, Tagar had a few cubs. A 1969 article from the Sacramento Union stated that Tagar was eventually moved into a cage with a widow lion named Virginia, and she gave birth to cubs on December 13th, Friday the 13th, of 1968. Though, in general, the story of Tagar is just also absurd, with, just a ridiculousness to it, where at one point LaVey had even tried to get the lion recognized as a California pioneer in an article from the Daily Report dated 1966. But after Tagar was given to the San Francisco Zoo, he ended up in Tippi Hedren's care. She wrote about various big cats in her book, The Cats of Shambhala, which I was actually able to rent on the Internet Archive. The few instances of Tagar mentioned the lion in a rather shocking way. I took screenshots of the book to share what I found. Hedren's book stated that Tagar, who had been owned by someone involved in black magic, came to the Canyon Flats from the San Francisco Zoo. The zookeepers found Tagar too belligerent for the Bay City zookeepers to handle. Though he frightened Hedren, Tagar did end up being a good father to his cubs. Interestingly, Tagar came with another lion named Alice, who Hedren stated were two wayward black magic lions from the San Francisco Zoo. If we know that Tagar came from Anton LaVey, where did Alice come from? For there to be another black magic practitioner. Hedren's book does not name LaVey or the other potential black magic or black magician. Hedren's book would go on to mention that Tagar scared/intimidated most other people. The final part of Hedren's book on Tagar states, "Though I was afraid of Tagar for much of his life, and rightfully so, I still felt a deep loss when he left us." I'm not going to get into the he said, she said parts of the LaVey history, even though I know it probably seems like I already did, and it's kind of hard to stay away from it because of what's written in these books, such as The Secret Life of a Satanist and We Are Satanists. What happened within the family has nothing to do with me, obviously, and ultimately would detract from this review about the book. And so I just want to stay focused on that. There are many parts to this book, though, that just did not age well. Many things that LaVey said seemed to be taking the piss, and potentially humorous for the time back in 1990. Of course, that's 35 years ago now, as of 2025, so I can't expect these jokes to hit the same. But with the passage of time, it has made some of these bits just flat out disgusting. LaVey's misogyny and anti-feminist rhetoric came off as the perfect type of person you'd see on modern-day Twitter or streaming on Kick. The idea that women control the world by always being cold and making the rooms cold was just dumb. I think it was supposed to be a joke, but I just couldn't help but roll my eyes at that. I mean, it's scientifically proven that men have more body heat than women, so why even go on a tirade about that? His misogyny was actually true, though. I mean, granted, he owned up to it, but I don't think he realized how misogynistic he really was. But the misogyny was true, especially in how he remembered women, like Marilyn Monroe, and especially Jane Mansfield. They were recollected as really nothing more than sex objects, while their other talents and skills were diminished. And now Marilyn wasn't talked about that much, where Jane really was. The book states that Jane hadn't picked up the violin since she was a girl, but that's not true. 10 years before her death, she was on TV playing violin and piano. Remembering her as a sex doll who loved to piss herself is incredibly dismissive and does not do her any justice. The fact that the affair LaVey and Jane allegedly had wasn't technically acknowledged was also strange to me. It seemed actually incredibly dismissive of Diane, who had already had a child with Anton by that time. Of course, one of the major parts I was interested in reading about was the Manson connection. I found it disappointing how much of the connection between Anton LaVey, Susan Atkins, and the Church of Satan was downplayed. While, yes, Susan Atkins was definitely a crackhead. Okay, maybe not crack, but she was, as she admitted, on many different drugs. She actually talked about her involvement with the Church of Satan way more than LaVey did. I often wondered if LaVey hated hippies because he was a San Francisco resident and was likely surrounded by them, or if Susan perhaps attributed to his hatred for them. I'm not sure how true it is, but in Charles Manson Now, Stanton LaVey stated that Susan had a much bigger role in the Church of Satan than Anton said. Apparently, Stanton had written Charles Manson at one point even, actually, and Manson apparently remembered the letter. Manson said that he recalled Anton would do anything for a buck. Which, of course, we didn't need Charlie to tell us that, as it seemed quite obvious because Anton was quite the showman. From a magical standpoint, this book, and LaVey in general, really didn't delve that deeply, not as much as I would have wanted. He spent most of his time talking about social philosophies and conveying an absolutist, brutal idea of how people should stay within the confines that he made up. The 1998 book, Satan Speaks, conveys this clearly, with LaVey admitting that he was against abortion, though oddly for compulsory birth control, stating that essentially not every person should be a parent. Still, an incredibly authoritative and iron fist mentality. Sometimes I wonder if this mentality is why Xena ended up pregnant and giving birth at the age of 14. Well, she ended up pregnant at 13 and gave birth to Stanton at 14. To me, that pregnancy breaks the tenet of the Satanic Bible of do no harm to little children. Isn't it harmful for a 13-year-old to end up pregnant? Overall, I'll be honest, I cannot recommend this book. There are some books that are written to be read, and there are books that are written to be written. And to me, this book was written to be written. It's not fun to read. It's not leisurely. There are too many stops. And when you finally get to go, it's still slow. It chugs and chugs, and even when you find an interesting bit of information, it's like a needle in the haystack. While I thought that it was interesting, some of the interactions that LaVey had with true crime people, such as the Manson family, such as potentially swapping houses where Jay Sebring used to live, allegedly knowing Abigail Folger's mother, supposedly being stopped on the street by Richard Ramirez, and even being gifted a John Wayne Gacy painting by Marilyn Manson, these instances were few and far between. It's here that I see why the book is called the authorized biography and not the true biography. Granted, as I stated before, this isn't the biography on Howard Stanton LaVey. It's about the showman, Anton Szandor LaVey. Do I believe that Anton had a genuine interest in magic and mysticism? Yes. There's even news articles that prove that. He definitely had some sort of small practice going and genuinely seemed to believe that he was a magician of sorts. In the early days of the Church of Satan, he really leaned into those curses. But as time went on, especially after the Satanic Panic, it seems that Anton's interest in magic waned, and he focused more on writing down his philosophies. I feel like that is the more appropriate way to remember Anton LaVey, a 20th century philosopher and showman, part-time magician. In a way, Church of Satan reminds me of how McDonald's was actually founded by the McDonald's brothers, but was led to success by Ray Kroc. Despite LaVey founding the Church of Satan and its philosophies, it was Blanche Barton, Peter Gilmore, and Peggy Nadramia that actually ended up expanding on the thoughts of self-freedom that were initially written about. This is where We Are Satanists come in, the book, which, if you really want to read one or the other, I do recommend We Are Satanists, because if you're interested in the Church of Satan and the Church of Satan's philosophies, that is the book to read. If you want to know about Anton LaVey's diatribes, then go ahead and read The Secret Life of a Satanist. Strangely enough, though, despite all of the controversial things that Anton wrote or said, he would sometimes have good ideas about, not harming or bothering people, don't hurt, and don't hurt animals either, right? It's up in the air, though, if he practiced his own philosophy. But the idea to not be kind to those who don't deserve it is, of course, agreeable. Granted, there's a lot of things that are written that I feel a normal person could agree with. Yet, of course, that wouldn't make them a Satanist. In conclusion, I would not waste my time reading this book. You won't find any information that clarifies any potential questions you might have about LaVey or the Church of Satan. It's just another soapbox for him.